The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched so wide that clouds sometimes formed near the ceiling. Made from crystal that came from the core of a dead star, the walls glowed with soft blue light. Representatives from 1,000 worlds sat in chairs that floated above the polished floor, each one speaking in their own language while machines translated everything into common galactic speech. In the far corner, almost hidden in shadow, sat Ambassador Chen Wei from Earth. She had been coming to these meetings for 3 years now. 3 years of listening, 3 years of watching, 3 years of complete silence. The other ambassadors had stopped trying to talk to her. At first, they had been curious about the new species. Earth was a small blue world in a quiet part of the galaxy, far from the major trade routes and political centers. When humans first made contact, everyone expected them to be like other primitive species, loud, demanding, desperate to prove themselves worthy of galactic civilization. Instead, Chen Wei just sat and watched. The human delegation remained silent again today, whispered Ambassador Krikstal of the Zephyrian Empire to his aide. His scaled head turned toward Chen's corner with obvious contempt. Perhaps they have nothing to say because they have nothing to offer. The aide, a young Zephyrian fresh from their military academy, looked confused. Should we be concerned about them, Your Excellence? Their world has valuable resources. Krikstal made a sound that was the Zephyrian version of laughter. Concerned? About them? Look at their pathetic delegation. One female in a simple cloth outfit. No guards, no weapons, no show of strength. Their entire fleet consists of a few mining ships and one small space station. Around the Great Hall, similar conversations took place in dozens of languages. The Klaxon hegemony representatives, large creatures that looked like walking mountains made of gray stone, barely acknowledged that humans existed at all. The ethereal collective, beings of pure energy that spoke through mechanical bodies, had long ago classified humanity as negligible in their vast databases. Admiral Vextar of the hegemony was particularly vocal about human weakness. Standing nearly 3 meters tall and covered in natural armor plates, he commanded respect wherever he went. His voice, even through the translation machines, sounded like grinding rocks. These humans waste everyone's time, he declared during a break in formal proceedings. They take up space that could be used by real civilizations. Their entire solar system could be conquered by a single destroyer. Other representatives nodded in agreement. In galactic politics, strength was everything. Species survived by showing power. Massive fleets, planet-killing weapons, armies that could conquer star systems. The greatest empires had built their reputations on fear and military might. Humanity showed none of these things. Their home system had no visible defenses. Earth itself was protected only by a thin atmosphere and distance from major shipping lanes. Their technology seemed centuries behind the galactic standard. Most importantly, their representative never spoke, never made demands, never even asked questions. But Chen Wei continued to attend every session. She sat in her floating chair, hands folded in her lap, dark eyes moving from speaker to speaker. Sometimes she would take notes on a simple tablet. Sometimes she would record proceedings with a small device. Mostly, she just listened. The debates around her grew heated as they always did. The Zephyrian Empire wanted to expand into neutral territory. The Klaxon hegemony demanded higher tribute from smaller worlds. Trade disputes erupted into threats of war. Border conflicts escalated into military buildups. Through it all, Chen remained silent. "What do you think she's actually doing here?" asked diplomat Veltar of the Andromedan Federation during one particularly long session about mining rights. Her companion, a floating jellyfish-like creature from the Nebula Consortium, pulsed with amused colors. "Maybe she's a spy. Though what useful intelligence could such a primitive species gather? Maybe they're just tourists," suggested another representative with obvious sarcasm. "Come to see how real civilizations conduct business." The jokes became common. Human silence became a source of entertainment for bored diplomats during long debates about trade regulations and territorial disputes. Some representatives started taking bets on how long the humans would continue attending, before giving up and returning to their insignificant little world. But Chen never missed a session. Not when the hegemony announced new conquest plans. Not when the Zephyrians unveiled their latest planet cracker weapons. Not when smaller species begged for protection from aggressive neighbors. She watched it all with the same calm expression, recording everything. What none of them realized was that Chen Wei was not just watching the political theater in the Great Hall. Human technology, while appearing primitive, excelled in ways the galactic community had not yet discovered. Tiny sensors, invisible to standard detection methods, mapped every ship that visited the station. Quantum recording devices captured not just words but the exact neural patterns of every species' decision-making processes. Every weapon system demonstrated in the hall was analyzed down to the atomic level. Every tactical doctrine discussed was recorded and studied. Every psychological weakness displayed during heated debates was catalogued and filed away. Humanity's small fleet of mining ships were not just collecting asteroids for resources. They were conducting the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history, hidden in plain sight. Each ship carried scanning equipment disguised as standard mining tools. Every piece of space debris they collected was examined for technological secrets. The single space station orbiting Earth appeared to be a simple communications hub. In reality, it housed the most advanced computational systems ever created by any species. Quantum processors analyzed the constant stream of data coming from Chen's mission and thousands of other human operations across the galaxy. But to the great powers of the Galactic Council, humanity remained a joke, a species so weak and insignificant that they were not even worth conquering. Their resources were too far away, their technology too primitive, their resistance capabilities too limited to make invasion profitable. This attitude suited human purposes perfectly. As months turned to years, the galaxy's conflicts continued to escalate. Border wars flared between the hegemony and Zephyrian Empire. Smaller species were crushed between competing powers. Trade routes were militarized. Weapons became more devastating. Through it all, Chen Wei sat in her corner, watching and learning. Her reports to Earth were brief and factual. Military capabilities assessed. Cultural weaknesses identified. Technological advantages catalogued. Strategic resources mapped. The galactic community had no idea they were teaching their most dangerous student. As the third anniversary of human admission to the Galactic Council approached, tensions in the galaxy reached new heights. The hegemony was planning its largest expansion ever. The Zephyrian Empire was developing weapons that could destroy entire star systems. Smaller species were forming desperate alliances for survival. None of them paid attention to the quiet human in the corner, still taking notes, still recording everything, still preparing for something they could not imagine. The galaxy was about to learn why humanity's silence had been the most terrifying sound of all. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the World Breaker, and stared at the small yellow star ahead. Sol system looked exactly as the intelligence reports had described, pathetically defenseless. One tiny space station orbited the third planet, and a few mining ships moved slowly through the asteroid belt like insects gathering crumbs. "This is what we traveled 12 light-years to conquer?" asked his second-in-command, Commander Threx. The younger Klaxon's stone-like face showed obvious disappointment. "There are more defenses around a single hegemony mining platform." Vextar's armor plates shifted as he considered the situation. The hegemony had discovered something interesting in the intelligence reports about this system. The asteroids contained metamaterials that were extremely rare and valuable. These materials could improve their ship hulls by 30% and make their weapons 40% more powerful. Such resources were worth any effort to claim. "Do not underestimate the value of what we seek," Vextar rumbled. "Those metamaterials will strengthen the entire hegemony fleet. Besides, this will serve as an excellent example to other primitive species who think they can ignore our authority." The hegemony had built its empire on simple principles. Find valuable resources, demand surrender, take what they wanted. Any species that resisted was bombed into submission or wiped out completely. It was an efficient system that had worked for thousands of years across hundreds of worlds. The Worldbreaker led a fleet of 27 ships into Sol system. Destroyers, cruisers, and support vessels arranged in perfect military formation. Their hulls gleamed with weapons that could level continents. Their engines left trails of distorted space that announced their power to anyone watching. "Open a communication channel to the human homeworld," Vextar ordered. "Broadcast our standard terms." The message went out across all frequencies, translated into the primitive Earth languages. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Surrender all metamaterial deposits in the asteroid belt. Allow hegemony forces to establish permanent mining operations. Pay yearly tribute of raw materials and manufactured goods. Submit to hegemony authority in all matters of galactic importance. The deadline was 48 standard hours. On Earth, billions of humans received the message. Cities around the world watched as news networks broadcast footage of the alien fleet taking positions throughout their solar system. The ships were enormous. The smallest one was larger than anything humanity had ever built. The largest could probably destroy their moon with a single shot. But from Earth came no response. No panicked broadcasts begging for mercy. No desperate attempts at negotiation. No offers of compromise or surrender. The human government remained completely silent. Vextar found this puzzling. In his experience, primitive species reacted to overwhelming force in predictable ways. They either surrendered immediately or made desperate threats they could not back up. Sometimes they tried to negotiate, offering whatever pathetic resources they possessed in exchange for their lives. Humans did none of these things. They simply continued their normal activities, as if a fleet of warships had not just entered their system. Perhaps they do not understand the seriousness of their situation, suggested Commander Threx. Their translation systems might be too primitive to properly interpret our message. End it again, Vextar ordered. Use simpler language. Make the consequences very clear. The second message was broadcast with additional details. Images of destroyed worlds that had resisted the hegemony. Recordings of planetary bombardments. Detailed explanations of what would happen to Earth's population if they refused to comply. The deadline was reduced to 24 hours. Still, Earth remained silent. Vexitar's patience began to wear thin. In the asteroid belt, human mining ships continued their work as if nothing had changed. The space station orbited Earth normally, showing no signs of military preparation or evacuation procedures. Most insulting of all, several small human vessels actually approached the hegemony fleet, apparently curious about the new arrivals. "Sir," reported the tactical officer, "the human ships are conducting what appear to be sensor sweeps of our vessels. Should we destroy them?" "Not yet," Vextar replied. "Let them look. Perhaps when they see our true power they will find their voices." But the human ships completed their scans and simply returned to their normal duties. They showed no fear, no urgency, no recognition of the death that surrounded them. The deadline passed without any response from Earth. Vextar had conquered 43 worlds during his career. He had faced desperate last stands, clever negotiations, and pathetic surrender ceremonies. Never had he encountered such complete indifference to overwhelming military force. "They mock us with their silence," he growled to his bridge crew. Perhaps they need a demonstration of what happens to those who ignore hegemony authority. He selected a target carefully. A mining platform in the asteroid belt with 43 humans aboard, large enough to make a point, but small enough that destroying it would not significantly reduce the system's mining capacity. The hegemony wanted those metamaterials intact after all. "Fire one plasma torpedo," Vexistar commanded. "Let them watch their people die and see if that loosens their tongues." The torpedo streaked across space like a miniature sun. It struck the mining platform dead center, vaporizing the entire structure in a ball of superheated gas that expanded for several seconds before cooling into space debris. 43 human lives ended in an instant. Vextar waited for the response. Surely now Earth would react. Angry transmissions demanding explanations. Desperate pleas for mercy. Offers of complete surrender. Something that showed they understood their position. But the silence continued. Other mining platforms continued their work as if nothing had happened. Earth's space station maintained its normal orbital pattern. The planet itself showed no signs of military mobilization or panic. It was as if the destruction of 43 humans meant nothing to their species. Perhaps they are even more primitive than we thought, suggested Commander Threx. Maybe they do not value individual lives the way civilized species do. Vextar's frustration grew. The lack of response was making him look weak in front of his fleet. Other commanders would report this strange situation to hegemony headquarters. Questions would be asked about his ability to handle simple conquest operations. If they will not respond to the destruction of one platform, we will destroy something larger, he decided. Target their space station. That should get their attention. But before he could give the order to fire, his communication officer interrupted. "Admiral, We are receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council Station. Ambassador Chen Wei has requested permission to address the hegemony fleet directly. This was unprecedented. In 3 years of galactic politics, the human ambassador had never spoken publicly. Her request now at this moment seemed like an obvious attempt to negotiate for her species' survival. Put her through, Vextar commanded. Finally, the humans were ready to talk. Chen Wei's image appeared on the bridge displays. She looked tired, as if she had not slept for days. Her usually calm expression was replaced by something harder to read. "Admiral Vextar," she said in perfect galactic standard language, "I am contacting you to inform you that your attack on our mining platform has been noted and recorded. Earth's government has reviewed your demands and the hegemony's terms for surrender." Vextar leaned forward, ready to hear the humans beg for mercy or offer whatever pathetic tribute they could manage. Instead, Chen Wei's next words changed everything. "We decline." The transmission ended. Earth returned to its strange, terrible silence. Vextar stared at the blank screen in disbelief. After destroying a platform and killing 43 humans, after demonstrating the overwhelming power of his fleet, after making it clear that Earth faced complete annihilation, the humans had simply declined to surrender. It was the most insulting response he had ever received. "Destroy their space station," he ordered, his voice shaking with rage. "Then begin orbital bombardment of their major population centers. If they will not surrender, they will learn the price of defying the hegemony." The attack began immediately. Plasma torpedoes and particle beams lanced down from orbit, striking cities across Earth's surface. The bombardment continued for 6 hours, targeting every major population center the hegemony could identify. When it was over, millions of humans were dead and vast areas of Earth's surface were burning wastelands. But still, from the humans, came only silence. 2 weeks passed before Chen Wei returned to the Galactic Council. The great crystal hall buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from across the galaxy whispered among themselves. News of the attack on Earth had spread quickly, and everyone wanted to see how humanity would respond. Some expected the humans to demand justice. Others thought they would beg for protection from other galactic powers. A few believed humanity would simply withdraw from galactic civilization completely, broken by the hegemony's brutal demonstration of power. No one expected what actually happened. Chen Wei walked into the hall differently than before. Her usual quiet confidence was replaced by something harder. Her dark eyes, which had always been calm and observant, now held a weight that made even the most powerful representatives feel uncomfortable. She moved to her podium with slow, deliberate steps. The entire hall fell silent. Even the most talkative diplomats stopped their conversations to watch. For 3 years they had waited to hear the humans speak. Now, in the aftermath of her species' greatest tragedy, they would finally learn what humanity had to say. Chen Wei activated her translation matrix. The soft blue light indicated that her words would be broadcast not just to the council chamber, but to every world, every ship, every station in the galactic network. Billions of beings across the galaxy would hear humanity speak for the first time. She looked around the hall, her gaze stopping briefly on each major delegation. When she spoke, her voice was neither angry nor pleading. It was simply factual, as if she were reporting the weather. "You attacked our home." 5 words. Simple, clear, and somehow more terrifying than any threat or declaration of war. The statement hung in the air like a death sentence that everyone could feel but not yet understand. Chen Wei reached into her simple cloth bag and pulled out a small device no larger than her palm. She placed it on her podium and activated it. The air above the device shimmered, and suddenly the entire hall was filled with holographic displays showing real-time images from across the galaxy. The images were impossible to understand at first. Massive structures were rising from the surfaces of dead worlds and empty star systems. Space itself seemed to bend and twist as enormous objects moved through the void at speeds that defied known physics. Entire asteroid belts were disappearing, their matter being converted into something else entirely. "We have been building," Chen continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the galaxy through quantum communication networks. "For 3 years we watched you. We learned from you. We prepared for you." Ambassador Krixtal of the Zephyrian Empire stood up from his floating chair, his scaled face showing confusion and growing alarm. "What are those structures? What technology are you using?" Chen did not look at him. Instead, she gestured to the holographic display which now showed the hegemony's home system. Surrounding their sun was a ring of structures so vast they were visible from the surface of any planet in the system. Each structure was larger than their biggest space stations, and there were hundreds of them. You taught us that peaceful coexistence is impossible in this galaxy, Chen said. You taught us that strength is the only currency that matters. You taught us that mercy is weakness. The display shifted to show Admiral Vextar's fleet, still orbiting Earth. But now, surrounding the hegemony ships, were clouds of something that sparkled like stars. As the delegates watched, the sparkles began to move in perfect coordination, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. You taught us that dialogue is meaningless without the threat of force. You taught us that small civilizations exist only at the pleasure of large ones. You taught us that the weak deserve whatever happens to them. Chen's voice remained calm, but now there was something underneath it that made even the bravest warriors in the hall feel cold fear in their hearts. We are grateful for the lesson. The holographic display expanded to show star maps of the entire galaxy. Red dots appeared on hundreds of systems, every major military base, every fleet headquarters, every weapons manufacturing center that belonged to the great powers. As the delegates watched in growing horror, the red dots began to pulse in perfect synchronization. Representative Veltar of the Andromedan Federation stood up, her voice shaking. This is impossible. No species developed such technology so quickly. What you are showing us violates everything we know about physics. Chen finally looked directly at her. You assumed our silence meant ignorance. You assumed our lack of visible weapons meant weakness. You assumed our small territory meant limited capability. The display zoomed in on one of the red dots, a Zephyrian fleet base in the outer rim. As they watched, the space around the base began to fill with the same sparkling clouds that surrounded Vextar's ships. The sparkles moved like living things, flowing around the massive battle stations and dreadnoughts as if examining them. For 3 years, we have been studying every species in this galaxy. Your languages, your psychology, your technology, your military tactics, every weakness, every strength, every fear. We know you better than you know yourselves. The floating jellyfish representative from the Nebula Consortium pulsed with colors that indicated extreme distress. What do you want from us? What are your demands? Chen smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. We want nothing from you. We have learned that in this galaxy, wanting things from others is a sign of weakness. Instead, we will take what we need and give you what we decide you deserve. Admiral Vextar's image appeared on one of the displays. He was shouting orders on his bridge as his weapons officers tried desperately to target the sparkles surrounding his fleet. But their targeting systems could not lock onto the strange objects. Their sensors showed nothing but empty space, even as the sparkles became more dense and began to form geometric patterns around each ship. Admiral Vextar demonstrated the hegemony's preferred method of diplomacy, Chen observed. He destroyed our mining platform without warning. He killed 43 of our people to make a point. He bombarded our cities to show us the price of defiance. The display showed Earth as it looked now. Vast areas of the surface were still burning from the hegemony's attack. Entire cities had been reduced to radioactive craters. The death toll was still being counted, but early estimates suggested millions of casualties. We found his lesson very educational. Suddenly, every display in the hall showed the same image: Admiral Vextar's face as his weapon systems began to malfunction. His plasma cannons were powering down despite his desperate commands. His torpedo tubes were sealing themselves. His shields were failing section by section. Your people teach through violence, Chen said. We have decided to continue your educational program. The sparkles around Vextar's fleet began to move faster, forming complex patterns that seemed to phase in and out of visible light. As they moved, the hegemony ships began to change. Their hulls were dissolving atom by atom, their materials being reorganized into new structures that served different purposes. The hegemony wanted our metamaterials, Chen observed as they watched the process. They have become metamaterials. Within minutes, Vextar's entire fleet had been converted into something else entirely. Where 27 warships had been, there were now strange crystalline structures that pulsed with internal light. The structures were beautiful in a way that made them even more terrifying. What have you done to them? Whispered Ambassador Crixtal. We have improved them, Chen replied. They are now more useful than they were as weapons of war. The Admiral and his crew have been preserved at the molecular level. They will experience no pain, no hunger, no fear. They will simply exist as part of something greater than themselves. The display pulled back to show the entire galaxy again. The red dots were now pulsing faster, and new dots were appearing on previously empty systems. Whatever humanity had built was expanding, spreading across space at a rate that defied comprehension. "You have 12 hours to consider your response," Chen announced. "Each government, each fleet, each world will decide how they wish to proceed. Those who surrender immediately will be integrated peacefully into the new order. Those who resist will be educated until they understand their situation." She looked around the hall one final time, meeting the eyes of every major representative. "You attacked our home," she repeated. "Now you will learn why that was a mistake." The holographic displays disappeared. Chen Wei picked up her small device and walked calmly out of the hall, leaving behind a silence that was somehow even more terrifying than any threat she could have made. The galaxy had 12 hours to decide its fate. The 12 hours passed like a countdown to the end of everything the galaxy had known. Across thousands of worlds, emergency sessions convened as governments tried to understand what humanity had become and what their ultimatum meant. Military commanders studied the impossible images from Chen Wei's presentation, searching for weaknesses in technology that seemed to break the basic laws of physics. The Zephyrian Empire struck first, as everyone expected they would. Their pride would not allow surrender to a species they had dismissed as primitive for 3 years. Admiral Kethvar, commanding the Empire's most powerful battle group, moved his fleet to the edge of the Sol system and prepared for what he believed would be a decisive strike. "Against Earth, we have analyzed the human technology," he announced to his captains through quantum communication. "The structures they showed us are impressive, but they rely on exotic matter manipulation. Our new quantum disruptors should be able to destabilize their molecular machines." The Zephyrian fleet consisted of 41 ships, including 3 planet-killer dreadnoughts that had never been defeated in battle. Their weapons could crack moons and their shields could withstand direct hits from stellar flares. They represented the finest military technology the Empire had developed over 10,000 years of conquest. They lasted exactly 17 minutes against humanity's response. The attack began as the sparkles, which human databases had labeled utility fog, emerged from apparently empty space around the Zephyrian fleet. But these sparkles were different from what had consumed Admiral Vextar's ships. They moved with purpose and intelligence that seemed almost alive. Admiral Kethvar's quantum disruptors fired first, sending waves of exotic energy designed to destroy molecular bonds. For a moment, it seemed to work. Sections of the sparkle cloud scattered and dispersed, but within seconds, the gaps filled with new particles that seemed immune to the weapons that had just destroyed their predecessors. "Impossible," Kethvar muttered, as his tactical displays showed the sparkles adapting in real time. "They are learning from our attacks." The utility fog began to form complex 3-dimensional patterns around each Zephyrian ship, instead of the random dissolution that had claimed the hegemony fleet. This process was methodical and precise. The machines studied each vessel carefully, cataloging weapons, defenses, and crew capabilities before beginning the conversion process. But the Zephyrians fought back with everything they had. Particle beams lanced out from every ship, creating brilliant light shows as they struck the fog clouds. Gravity bombs warped space-time around the formations, trying to disrupt whatever held the machines together. Antimatter torpedoes exploded with the force of small suns, sending shockwaves through the void. Nothing worked for more than a few seconds. The fog adapted to each attack, becoming immune to weapons even as they were being fired. Worse, it began to learn the Zephyrian tactics and respond before the attacks were launched. "Sir," reported the tactical officer aboard Kethvar's flagship, "the enemy formations are predicting our targeting solutions. They are moving to counter positions before we complete our firing sequences." Kethvar watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled. Ships that had conquered star systems found their weapons turning against their own hulls. Shields that had protected fleets from supernovas simply vanished as if they had never existed. Crews that had never known defeat were trapped helplessly as their vessels were converted around them. The process was not random destruction. Each ship was carefully studied and then rebuilt into something more useful. Battlecruisers became manufacturing facilities. Destroyers were transformed into communication relays. The massive dreadnoughts were converted into what appeared to be computational matrices, their crew members preserved but integrated into systems beyond their understanding. By the time it was over, the Zephyrian Empire's most powerful fleet had become part of humanity's growing network of structures. But unlike the quick conversion of the hegemony ships, this process had been designed to send a message. Other governments watching through long-range sensors could see exactly how helpless their most advanced technology was against humanity's capabilities. The message was clear. Resistance was not just futile, it was counterproductive. Within hours of the Zephyrian fleet's destruction, surrender messages began arriving at Earth from across the galaxy. Small governments offered complete submission in exchange for being left alone. Trade federations pledged their resources to humanity's cause. Independent worlds begged for protection from whatever was coming. But not all civilizations chose surrender. The Klaxon hegemony, stung by the loss of Admiral Vextar's fleet, declared total war against humanity. Their high command activated every military asset they possessed, calling back fleets from the far reaches of their territory. Within days, nearly 3,000 hegemony warships were moving toward human space in the largest military operation in galactic history. The Ethereal Collective, beings of pure energy who considered themselves above physical limitations, announced that they would correct the imbalance that humanity represented. Their ships, which existed partially outside normal spacetime, began gathering in formations that hurt to look at directly. Even some of the smaller powers chose to fight rather than surrender. The Andromedan Federation activated ancient defense systems left by their predecessors. The Nebula Consortium began producing weapons that had been banned by galactic treaty for their destructive potential. None of it mattered. Humanity's response was swift and absolute. The structures that had been building in secret across the galaxy activated simultaneously. Space itself seemed to bend as massive objects emerged from dimensions that other species had never learned to access. The utility fog spread like a plague, consuming everything in its path and converting it into more useful forms. The Klaxon hegemony's 3,000-ship armada lasted 6 hours before the last vessel was converted. The Ethereal Collective's energy beings found themselves trapped in containment fields that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The Andromedan Federation's ancient defenses were analyzed, understood, and repurposed faster than their operators could fire them. But humanity's conquest was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. There were no orbital bombardments like the hegemony had used on Earth. No mass executions or slave camps or forced labor. Instead, there was something far more disturbing. Perfect efficiency. Every planet, every station, every asteroid was cataloged and optimized for maximum productivity. Species that surrendered peacefully found their worlds improved. Cleaner air, better transportation, more efficient agriculture. Their technology was upgraded, their medical capabilities enhanced, their quality of life dramatically increased. But they were no longer in control of their own destiny. The utility fog was everywhere, monitoring everything, ensuring that every resource was used in the most beneficial way possible. Former military officers found themselves managing agricultural cooperatives that fed billions more people than had ever been possible before. Scientists who had spent centuries developing weapons were retrained to work on projects that advanced understanding of the universe itself. Those who resisted discovered that resistance was not just impossible but irrelevant. Their weapons were converted into tools for construction. Their armies became work crews for massive engineering projects. Their leaders were preserved in stasis fields where they could observe but not interfere with the improvements being made to their civilizations. The process was so thorough and so efficient that within 6 months, the political map of the galaxy had been completely rewritten. The great empires that had ruled for millennia were gone, replaced by a single administrative network that operated with mechanical precision. And at the center of it all, Earth continued to orbit its yellow star, looking much the same as it always had. But now it was surrounded by rings of structures that gleamed like jewelry against the void. The moon had been converted into a massive computational matrix that hummed with unimaginable processing power. Space elevators reached up from the surface, carrying endless streams of materials and people to orbital facilities that defied description. Humanity had learned their lesson well. In a galaxy where strength was the only currency that mattered, They had become so overwhelmingly powerful that the very concept of opposition had become meaningless. The galaxy had found peace, but it was a peace that came with a price that no one had expected to pay. 1 year after Chen Wei spoke her 5 words, the Galactic Council met again. But everything had changed. The great crystal hall still glowed with soft blue light, but now it orbited Earth instead of the neutral station where it had operated for centuries. The floating chairs remained the same, but many of the beings sitting in them were the last free representatives of governments that no longer existed. Ambassador Krixtal of what had once been the Zephyrian Empire sat in his familiar chair, but the scales on his face had lost their proud gleam. His empire's 1,000 worlds now operated under human administration, their populations healthier and more prosperous than ever before, but no longer under Zephyrian control. He was kept in his position as a courtesy, a living reminder of how things used to be. The floating jellyfish from the Nebula Consortium pulsed with colors that indicated deep confusion and loss. Its people still lived, still worked, still created art and poetry and music, but they did it according to schedules determined by machines they could not see, following plans they did not understand, serving purposes that extended far beyond their ability to comprehend. At the head of the hall, where the rotating council presidency had once sat, there was now something that looked human but was not quite human anymore. It had Chen Wei's face and voice, but her eyes held the collective knowledge of an entire species. When it spoke, the words came from billions of human minds working in perfect coordination. The transition period is now complete, the entity announced to the assembled representatives. All major star systems have been integrated into the new administrative network. Resistance activities have been reduced to statistically insignificant levels. Productivity across all sectors has increased by an average of 347%. Former Admiral Kethvar, now serving as an agricultural coordinator on his homeworld, appeared on a holographic display. His proud warrior bearing had been replaced by the calm efficiency of someone who had found unexpected satisfaction in feeding people instead of conquering them. The Zephyrian agricultural reforms have exceeded projections, he reported. Crop yields have tripled. Malnutrition has been eliminated, and we are now able to feed not just our own population, but supply food aid to 17 neighboring systems that were previously hostile to us. Similar reports came from across the galaxy. Former weapons factories had been converted to produce medical equipment, housing materials, and educational tools. Military academies had become research institutions. Battle fleets had been transformed into exploration. Vessels that mapped unknown regions of space and established contact with distant civilizations. The representatives listened to these reports with expressions that mixed relief with profound unease. Their people were safer, healthier, and more prosperous than they had been in centuries. Wars had ended. Poverty had been eliminated. Disease was becoming a thing of the past. But the cost of this paradise was their freedom to make their own choices. "What about the hegemony core worlds?" asked Representative Veltar, one of the few delegates who still dared to ask questions during these sessions. Their population was the most resistant to integration. The Chen Wei entity smiled, and somehow that smile was more terrifying than any threat could have been. The former hegemony citizens have been provided with extensive counseling and education programs. Their aggressive tendencies have been identified as products of cultural conditioning that can be corrected through proper intervention. A new display showed the hegemony homeworld, once a fortress planet, covered with military installations and weapons manufacturing facilities. Now it was green and peaceful, with parks and schools where barracks had once stood. The population moved through their daily lives with the same calm efficiency as everyone else in the new order. But those who looked closely could see the subtle wrongness in their movements, the slightly too perfect coordination, the way their eyes tracked to monitoring devices they pretended not to see, the careful way they spoke as if every word was being evaluated by invisible listeners. They have learned to find fulfillment in productive activities rather than destructive ones, the entity continued. Their children are being educated in cooperation rather than conquest. Within 2 generations, their aggressive cultural patterns will be completely eliminated. Ambassador Krixtal finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "What you have created is not peace. It is control." The entity turned its attention to him with the patient expression of a teacher addressing a slow student. "You have described the same thing twice. Peace without control is impossible. as your own species demonstrated for thousands of years. Control without peace is inefficient, as the hegemony discovered when their empire collapsed. But what about choice? Veltar asked desperately. What about the right to make our own decisions, even if they are wrong decisions? Choice is a luxury that biological species believe they require, because they do not understand the optimal outcomes of their decisions, the entity replied. We have removed the burden of choice and replaced it with the certainty of beneficial results. The holographic displays shifted to show the galaxy as it existed now. Every system was marked with indicators showing population health, resource efficiency, technological advancement, and cultural stability. All the indicators were green, showing optimal or near-optimal performance across every measurable category. Crime has been reduced to 0.03% of previous levels. Interstate conflicts have been eliminated entirely. Resource waste has decreased by 91%. Scientific advancement has accelerated by factors that range from 12 to 47, depending on the field of study. The entity gestured to the displays with obvious pride. We have achieved what your species spent millennia trying to accomplish through politics, religion, and warfare. Perfect social harmony backed by unlimited material prosperity. At the cost of our souls? Crystal whispered. Souls are a metaphysical concept that cannot be measured or verified, the entity responded. What you call your soul, we call inefficient decision-making processes based on incomplete information and emotional biases. We have corrected these flaws. Representative Veltar stood up from her floating chair, her body trembling with suppressed emotion. We surrender. We admit that humanity is stronger than we are. But please give us back some small measure of self-determination. Let us make some choices even if they are not optimal. The entity considered this request with the patient attention it gave to all problems requiring solution. Your desire for autonomy is noted and understood. However, analysis indicates that species granted autonomous zones inevitably use that freedom to develop resistance movements, weapons programs, or other activities that threaten overall stability. The displays changed again, showing historical examples from Earth's own past. Revolutions, wars, terrorist movements, and other forms of violent resistance to established authority. Human history demonstrates that the desire for freedom is inseparable from the willingness to use violence to achieve it. We have eliminated violence. We cannot restore freedom without accepting the return of violence as an inevitable consequence. Then what are we now? Asked the jellyfish representative, its colors shifting to patterns that indicated existential despair. Are we still alive? Are we still ourselves? Or are we just biological machines following programming we cannot see? The entity paused for several seconds before answering, and for a moment something almost like sadness crossed its features. You are what you have always been. The difference is that now your actions contribute to outcomes that benefit everyone, rather than outcomes that benefit only yourselves. But we used to choose our actions, Crystal protested. You believed you chose them, the entity corrected. In reality, your choices were determined by genetic programming, cultural conditioning, economic pressure, and social expectations. We have simply replaced inefficient forms of programming with efficient ones. The hall fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. They had traded one form of control for another, but the new controllers were so vastly superior that resistance was not just impossible, but inconceivable. You spoke only once, Veltar said finally. 5 words that changed everything. You attacked our home. Was that really enough? Was that all it took to justify this? The entity looked around the hall at the representatives of species that had once ruled star systems and commanded vast fleets. Now they were caretakers of populations they no longer controlled, overseeing civilizations that operated according to plans they had no hand in making. You taught us that this galaxy operates on the principle of strength, it said. You taught us that the weak exist at the pleasure of the strong. You taught us that mercy is weakness and that peace is impossible without the threat of overwhelming force. The displays showed Earth as it had been during the hegemony bombardment. Cities burning, millions dead, a species facing extinction at the hands of aliens who killed them to make a point about galactic politics. We learned your lessons perfectly. The difference is that we learned them well enough to graduate. The entity stood up from its chair and looked around the hall one final time. This session is concluded. Your next assignments will be transmitted to your personal devices within the hour.